PC builds are finally back, and boy have I missed doing videos like this. In this one, I'll be showing you how to put together the best $800 gaming PC for 2022 and even 2023 at this point. I'll be walking through all the parts, how to actually assemble the system, and looking at performance later. Let's do this. The Corsair iCUE 5000T provides the ultimate in airflow, RGB lighting and mounting compatibility for PC builds in 2022. With 3 alloy fans included, 160 addressable RGB lights in the front, roof and floor panels, Corsair have really taken things up a notch. Learn more about the awesome 5000T in our build videos over on the channel or at the where to buy links in the description below. Let's begin by starting with the most controversial part of today's video, which parts are actually the best for you budget builders. Now the best budget CPU is this, the Intel Core i3-12100F. Intel do have some 13th Gen i3s rumoured to be landing soon, but they will be more expensive at launch, and this is going to be more than good enough for what we need today. With Intel's latest performance and efficiency cores, it's got stacks of power for the latest titles, fast single-threaded performance, and supports both DDR4 and DDR5 memory. Originally, I'd planned to pair the CPU up with Nvidia's pretty good RTX 3050, but then I went onto justgpus.com, Newegg's new GPU comparison website, and realised that actually the 3050 is a very expensive card for what it is. DLSS is all good, but is it really over $300? No. And that's where this comes in, the 6650 XT. This Asus dual model is one of the more affordable designs out there and will deliver top tier 1080p gaming performance. It's cheaper but better than a 3060, cheaper than an RTX 3050 and miles better. I mean, look at the graphs we did here to compare these cards. And while it costs more than the 6600 non-XT, you're going to get around 15% more frame rate, plenty of video memory, a great design. We'll look at this in more detail when we install it later. But are these two the best budget combos right now for a CPU and a GPU? The answer is yes. We of course need to install our i3 into something, and that something is probably going to be a motherboard. Good luck installing your i3 into anything else. Now, on motherboards, you've got a few choices with Intel. You've got the Z series chipset, that's for high-end builders on the whole. You've got the P chipset, which is kind of in the middle, and then the H chipset, which for me is a bit too restrictive. I would recommend picking up a DDR4 motherboard for a build like this. DDR5 is overkill and doesn't give you any performance upside right now. Plus, you also want a board with Wi-Fi. There is nothing worse than recommending someone build a PC on the proviso and presuming they have Ethernet installed in their desk setup. Not many people do, and aftermarket Wi-Fi dongles are frankly often a bit shit. And that's where this comes in. Now, it is going to cost you a little bit more cash, around $140 odd I think I paid for this. That's more, believe it or not, than our CPU, but that's just the way motherboards have gone recently. Shave a bit of cash off with a H series chipset, but in my mind, B series is probably where it's going to be at. To give you guys a quick tour around the motherboard, you've got 4 RAM DIMM slots, all DDR4 compatible, the LGA 1700 socket for the new 12th and 13th gen CPUs with a BIOS update, and a really solid rear I/O that gives you Wi-Fi 6, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, and USB-C. The most important part, as I say though, is it supports Intel 12th and 13th gen processors. Lift up the arm, pull back the cover, drop your CPU in, not literally, that's going to get you into a whole heap of hot water. There we go. Give it a bit of a wiggle to make sure it's seated properly, pop the cover down. The black plastic will then release itself and you can add the arm in to stop anything from going anywhere. Nice and easy. I mentioned earlier about the importance of DDR4 memory, and that's where this Corsair Vengeance RGB RS kit comes in. Now, I'm not sure Corsair will be very happy me saying this, but you know, maybe this is the video I throw my brand deals out the window. It doesn't matter what DDR4 memory you buy. As long as it's got a decent cast latency and aesthetically lines up with what you want to do, any RAM kit is fine. The reason I've picked Corsair is because they're often just the best on a lot of levels. Their iCUE software is fantastic. Their memory is very stable. I've never had any XMP issues with Corsair memory. I have with other brands. And I mean, at the heart, the company, I don't know if it is still called, but it used to be called Corsair Memory Limited or something along those lines. They're memory through and through, and they do a great job with RAM kits like this. Once the RAM's in, we can also move over to the SSD, and if I'm honest with you, I probably wasted about $20 here, but on purpose. It looks like Corsair's not the only brand I could be annoying in this one. Samsung drives are a little bit more expensive for what they are, but they perform very well. You get very good longevity on them. Once again, they're a drive I've never ever had a problem with, and that sadly isn't the the case for all SSD options out there. The SSD 980 is a Gen 3 drive, meaning it still gives us up to 3.5 gigabytes of read and writes. Not Gen 4 speeds, but frankly, you don't need them in a system like this. GPUs only need a fast SSD if they're like a 3080, 4080 tier or above. What we're going to do is we're just going to remove the little teeny tiny screw with a aptly named teeny tiny screwdriver, and then we can drop the SSD into the slot just above where we'll install our graphics card a bit later. Add the screw back in and our RAM and SSD are all finished. That then paves the way for us to finish off this bit of the build by popping in the cooler. Now, this video is probably controversial in a few ways, and it's not stopping anytime soon. This is the Intel stock cooler, and to be completely honest with you, it's totally fine for what we're doing here. You can't overclock the processor on this motherboard anyway. It's going to stop the CPU thermal throttling and allow it to hit those nice temperatures, as long as we've got plenty of case airflow, and it's free. It comes included with the CPU, saving us loads of money. Another $40 on a cooler can be better spent on a more beefy GPU, especially at this tier of build. If it's brand new, it will come with pre-applied thermal paste, but I have used this cooler in one of our build guides before. We do reuse some of our components, in case you were wondering. Then we're going to kind of find a nice place for the cable to run. I'm thinking about here, because the cable can reach from this side. If we move it over there, we're not going to have enough slack to get to the header, which is just out of frame here in the corner of the motherboard. Once that important decision has been made, we're going to rest the cooler on top of the CPU. You'll then see it sits quite nicely, and we can push in each of the pins on either corner. Add in the 4-pin CPU fan header. That will spin our fan into action, and of course make sure our CPU stays nice and cool. And with that, the motherboard assembly, as it's dubbed, that's this thing right here, is now finished. We can go and move this into the case next, and once again, this is a part of the build where, to be honest, you've got a lot of choice. If you're a first-time builder watching this video and thinking, you know what, James, I really don't want to screw this up and I'm going to follow your guide to the T, this is one part that with a little bit of research, you can quite easily swap out for something else. Now, in this build, you need to make sure the case is micro ATX or bigger, as the motherboard we've gone for is M-ATX. Our GPU choice is pretty short, so no worries about height compatibility there. Sometimes being short does have its advantages. And of course, it gives us a slightly smaller form factor build, as the dust filter flies off the top of the case. Perfect for those with a smaller gaming setup, or people who just haven't got loads and loads of desk space for a huge PC. This is Kolink Citadel mesh, and to be honest with you, I love it. I've already added a couple of RGB fans at the front to give it a bit of wow factor, but they do a glass version with RGB units included as standard. With a mesh design, a nice swingy door, tempered glass side panel, that's definitely the technical terminology, by the way. And support for M-ATX motherboards, you can't really go too far wrong. Whether it's the biggest case or the smallest case in the world, I always recommend you take all the side panels off first. That includes the glass and the rear steel ones, and sometimes even that one at the front, before laying the chassis down flat on a table to make the whole build process a lot easier. Before going too gung-ho and just slapping your motherboard into the case, there are a couple of things just to quickly check. Does your motherboard have an I/O shield built in? Ours does, meaning we haven't got to do anything. If it's separate like this, you need to add it in before screwing the motherboard down. Secondly, where are the holes on your motherboard? A standard M-ATX board should have 3 at the top, 3 along the middle, and 2 down the bottom, but the ones at the bottom are different heights. Ours has that, and all of the standoffs, these sort of metal posts in the case, are in the right place. That means none of those need moving about. If your answer to all those questions is all sorted, or you've gone ahead and just done those minor amendments, you can add the motherboard into place. You can see how much easier this is with the RAM and the SSD already done, as trying to fit your hands in and fit these in later can be a real challenge. Rest the motherboard over all the standoffs in the case, and then screw these down with a screwdriver. Start from the middle, work your way outwards, make sure they're nice and tight, but no force, major pressure, or anything like that is required. Looking really good. You can see why I've gone for a micro ATX motherboard in a micro ATX case. It just fits so well. Feels like a good combination to have. What you could do at this stage is you could pop the GPU in, but don't. Instead, add the power supply in first. Is it more boring? Yes, I get it. Power supply is not very interesting, but adding in the GPU when all your wires and cables haven't yet been done can be a mistake. This is Cooler Master's 500 watt unit. It's only an 80 plus certified, not 80 plus gold or anything fancy, but it doesn't need to be. It's also not modular, but it doesn't matter. The cables are black as standard, nice rubber individual sleeving, which looks good, even on the motherboard one, which is a nice change as some budget units have this horrible kind of mesh finish. The only real disadvantage is that you've got all these wires that you can't really organize. It's not modular, it's It's not even semi-modular, but it's saving you a lot of money. And if you ever need to upgrade any part of the system, there are some extra wires for bonus hard drives, SSDs, or anything like that. Here is where I'm going to install the hard drive, and you have got a couple of options. In some cases, you can install it fan up, where it will pull air out of the case, but in this one, and most chassis, you want a fan down orientation. Just don't put the PC on a rug, as that may starve your PSU, and we all know what happens when power supplies don't get sufficient cooling. It normally ends in a boom and some smoke. Not that I'm at all insinuating this power supply is a fire hazard. That's another brand relationship ruined in one video. This is not good. Why am I doing this? Add in all of your screws. We've got one in each corner basically, 4 which is going to hold the unit in place. And I suppose also ground the case by extension as well with our wall power, so make sure these are making nice physical contact. That's important. As well as adding the power cables in, which I'll do in a second, we also want to pop in the front panel cables, which consists of USB 3, that's this blue one, HD audio, this black one, and our JFP1 front panels. USB 3 goes to the right of the motherboard, your HD audio to the bottom left, and the JFP ones to the bottom right. I'm then going to follow this up with 2 more cables, the 24-pin motherboard power, which goes to the right-hand side of the board, just above the USB 3 we put in a minute ago, and then the 8-pin, the 4+4-pin CPU power, which goes up to the top left. That's going to give, obviously, the motherboard power and our GPU and stuff through the PCI lane, and then the CPU its own power in that connector at the top left. I have also got a PCI power connector I need to add in too to give the GPU what we call auxiliary power in addition to what it gets from the motherboard. But first, we actually need a graphics card installed to give power to in the first place, which is where I handily pick up what I prepared earlier, the Asus Dual 6650 XT. If you're still unsure about this as a viable option, check out the up-to-date pricing I found on Newegg, and then check out the performance graphs. It ranks higher than the 6600, the 6600 XT, the 3060, way higher than the 3050, all for under $300 at the time of filming. Up-to-date pricing and availability can be found at the description below. These things do change and vary by region, but on the whole, this is a better value option than basically anything else. I'm going to remove these PCI lanes at the back here, which I think need taken out with a screw. Then I can push the retention clip back on the slot and slot the GPU into place. Oh, yes. Now that, I was going to say it's starting to come together. It's basically finished at this stage, bar a few wires, and it fits perfectly with the aesthetic I am going for. All I need to do is just pop a screw in to hold the graphics card into place, which is way easier than it actually sounds. We need to invent like a magnetic GeekaWhat screwdriver, but one that costs a bit less than the Linus one. It looks like a nice screwdriver, but I haven't got those funds to be knocking about. Not with these budget systems anyway. I'm going to pop in my 8-pin cable. Oh, yes. GPU has a bit of power, and add back on just for aesthetics more than anything else. This rear cover, get in there. Come on, in you go. Oh, yes. For a budget PC, this is looking really, really sick. The whole build just feels so well proportioned. I love this little case, but as I say a moment ago, the proof is in the pudding. Will it turn on? Will it perform well in games? There's only one way to find out. So let's grab a keyboard. Boom. Let's grab a mouse. Double boom. A monitor, triple boom, and let's get gaming. Or at least see if it turns on for the first time. That would be a good start, wouldn't it?
How much is the monitor?
More than the PC. But it's fine, you know. If you'd like to find out what monitors we actually recommend buying, rather than the first one in the studio, check out the links below. Here we go. Hit the power button. Oh, okay, we've got some fans spinning. RAM's lit up. I'm not sure whether Windows is on this drive yet or not. We might have to install that. Is the monitor on? No? How do you turn this on? Will we have any luck? This could be a long drum roll.
6 hours later.
Oh, it's stuck. CPU RAM. Oh dear. It was the RAM. So I just changed the memory, thinking, no, that won't be it. Oh, what is going on here? Oh, and it's going straight into Windows. We do need to tweak some BIOS settings. What I think this is that it's trying to clock this memory up to 3600. We don't need it to run at 3600, but the previous settings on the board must have been with a 3600 megahertz kit. The problem is, because this is a cheaper motherboard, there's no clear CMOS button, so there's no way of resetting the motherboard to its default settings unless we go and take the battery out. So let me try a different kit of RAM, jump into the BIOS, we'll tweak those settings, then test that performance. But I am glad it worked. I was getting a little bit squeamish there that I'd done something drastically wrong. I've managed to get in, but by changing out to a Gale Orion kit with XMP off. I'm then going to enable extreme memory overclocking, and that's going to set the frequency to, interestingly, 4000 megahertz. So I think this is where the issue is. The motherboard's not picking up the right XMP profiles for the memory, which is causing all the instability. So this is a 3200 megahertz kit. So if we set it to 3200 megahertz, and hopefully that will fix our issues once and for all, but definitely a RAM issue. RAM can be the most common cause of an issue on on a system when you're trying to debug. So let's see what happens this time around. There we go. By the looks of the lights on the motherboard and by the screen, we've managed to fix the problem. And in theory, it should boot into Windows in 3, 2, 1. What's the pin for this? Do you know? Way, we remembered the pin. That was a bit of a hassle, wasn't it? But we're in to the PC and we can load up our first game of the day, a little bit of Formula 1 2022. After, of course, an epic glam montage where we take a look at this system in action. I'll rejoin you for the benchmarks in just a moment. The first title I want to test out is a little bit of F1 2022. It's a racing game that's actually quite hard to run, given how heavy it is on shadows and reflections, and it's quite possibly the most popular racing sim game out at the moment. After this, we're going to work through into some of our first-person shooters to get a really thorough picture of the performance. If you jump into the graphics settings, you can see it's basically on high settings across the board. We've got AMD Fidelity effects on for our ambient occlusion, and then if you jump through into the video mode, you'll see we've got 1080p on our 6650 XT. Other settings, all pretty much as you would expect. Now, we could do the benchmark mode, but that would be boring. So instead, I'm going to do a custom race and see just how we can get on. It's lights out and away we go. 127 frames per second on average to begin with. I've had a terrible start, but the frame rate is looking very, very good. And that's the bit that matters. Oh no, this goes from bad to worse. Oh, making some places back. Really quite difficult playing at such an angle, but the frame rate's solid. The game looks visually, I mean, for 1080p, that looks pretty stunning. Can we get a cheeky one down the inside? Oh, it's very late, but it's very good. We went off the track very slightly, but who cares? Formula 1 2022 looking absolutely awesome. But you're probably wondering, James, what about some of those first-person shooters as well? We don't just play simulation games, you know? Well, let's take a look, shall we, at Overwatch 2 next of all. Yes. That was on purpose, don't worry. Now then, let's go in and just tweak some of our settings, shall we? So let's go to, no, wrong one, options. So we could run at 1440p, but I think for the purposes of today, we'll run at 1080p. We will set dynamic render scale to off to make sure we're running at true 1440p. Frame rate, we're gonna go maximum. VSync turned off. And then when we jump into the graphics quality, we're just gonna set this, I think, to high as the overall preset. These are all the settings we're gonna go for. Hit apply, restart the game, then jump into a quick online match. Frame rate, as always, will be in the corner with MSI Afterburner's Reaver Tuner. And here we go, 200 frames per second out the doors. Yeah, baby. Overwatch 2, not a particularly tricky game to run, but still 234 FPS ain't half bad for a first attempt. Taking them all on my own. No, that was a mistake, ladies and gents. I don't know what I was thinking there, but I wasn't thinking logically. Couple of cheeky kills on the board. This is going wow. The game looks absolutely phenomenal as well. Really, really great at 1080p, over 200 FPS the whole way through. Overwatch absolutely delivering for us in this case. And it's not the only game to do so. We tried a wide variety of other titles, including Fortnite at 1080p competitive settings. Here we achieved 154 frames per second on average when testing at 1080p competitive settings, and had a really, really lag-free, stutter-free, smooth gaming experience on this budget-oriented build. The good results carried on rolling through into Apex Legends 2, where at 1080p high settings this time around, the 6650 XT maxed out at an average of 149 frames per second. 90 and 99th percentile numbers were strong too, and the game provided a really consistent, solid gaming experience. In COD Warzone, we managed to get some pretty good results too. Here we hit that all-important 60 frames per second mark on average, with 90 and 99th percentile results in the region of 56 and 52 frames per second. This just goes to show that a budget build certainly is no slouch in the latest titles, and that you haven't got to spend a fortune to get great performance. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to get subscribed. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.